Continuing here with how the great religions began. Book 1, The Religions of India. Part 1, Buddhism, the religion of the Enlightened One. Section 6, The Great Renunciation. When Prince Siddhartha announced that he was going to leave his home and become a beggar monk, it was a great shock to his father. King Suddhodana had hoped that his son would become the next king of the Sakyas, and he tried to persuade the prince not to leave the palace. But Siddhartha's mind was made up. Just at that time, Princess Yasodhara gave birth to a boy. Now, thought King Suddhodana, my son will not leave home. His love for his child will bind him to his home and keep him from becoming a beggar monk. But King Suddhodana was mistaken. When the child was born, Siddhartha knew that unless he ran away from his home before his love for his little son became too great, he would never discover the true wisdom of life. Garbage. That is garbage. The true wisdom of life is in taking care of your responsibilities. I mean, he had all the means, and well, not all the means in the world, but he had plenty. One night, he called in Channa and told him to get his favorite horse ready for a long journey. Immediately, asked Channa, surprised that his master should want to start out on a journey after midnight. Yes, immediately, Siddhartha replied, and I want you to come with me, so get ready at once. When Channa left to carry out his orders, Prince Siddhartha entered Princess Yasodhara's chamber. He saw her asleep, with her hand resting on the head of the sleeping child beside her. Prince Siddhartha looked lovingly at them, but he did not wake them. He was afraid his heart would weaken at his wife's pleas to remain at home. He left the palace with Channa, and together they traveled in the direction of the Magadha kingdom. When they were at a great distance from Kapila, they stopped and alighted from their horses. With Channa's help, Siddhartha shaved his head and beard. On seeing his master shaven like a beggar monk, Channa began to weep. So, being clean-shaven was obviously a sign of great weakness back in the day. Or was a sign of fascism in other parts of the world. In other parts of the world, it was a sign of homosexuality, which was more... Anyways. He began to weep. Now, Channa, you return to the palace, and I will start out on my journey, begging my food and trying to learn the truth of life. Now, if you can make a living, don't be a beggar. That's not right. Yes, my prince. I'm no longer your prince, Channa. I no longer want to be a ruler over people. I want to be as one of my fellow men, that I may understand their lives and discover how they ought to live. In order I want to be as one of my fellow men, that I may understand their lives and discover how they ought to live in order to lead good, happy lives. Yes, my prince, Channa sobbed. Channa returned slowly to the palace in Kapila, and Siddhartha started out down the dusty road on foot. On the way he met a beggar. Come, said the prince to the beggar, let us change clothes. The prince gave the beggar his beautiful robes and put on the beggar's clothes in exchange. Then Prince Siddhartha walked on, a beggar in search of the wisdom of the world that would explain all of life to him. That night, when Prince Siddhartha Gautama left his home to become a beggar monk in his 29th year of his life, is known as the night of the Great Renunciation. It would be better if he had figured out how to live life in the circumstances that he had. Part 7, The Long and Weary Search. For 7 years, Siddhartha wandered from place to place in search of wisdom. His voice was gentle, his conversation simple and wise, and all the people he met became his friends. Once, as he sat in a grove of trees, talking to some wandering monks, Bimbisara, king of Magadha, came and listened to him. When Siddhartha ended, King Bimbisara said to him, "Your words are wise. Come to my palace and become my chief advisor. If it were honor and riches that I sought, I would be a king in a kingdom of the Ganges," Siddhartha replied. "But my search is for things neither wealth nor honor can buy, for I am in search of the true knowledge of life." Prelaces, perhaps, instead of dignities. Then said King Bimbisara, "Promise me that when you find that wisdom, you will come and teach it to me." "I promise," said Siddhartha. Then he left the grove and wandered on until he reached the great teacher Alara. "Teach me the wisdom of the world," said Siddhartha to Alara. Alara replied and said, "Study the Vedas. There you will find the wisdom of the world." Siddhartha wandered on until he came to the great teacher Udaka, and to him too he asked, "Teach me the wisdom of the world." And if you heard my stomach growling, that's one of the wisdoms of the world. "Teach me the wisdom of the world." Udaka also answered, "Study the Vedas, for in them all wisdom is hidden." And original scripture, that's true. All the wisdom of the age is connected to it. But Siddhartha had spent many years studying the holy scriptures, and in them he found no explanation why the Brahman made people suffer illness and old age and death. He didn't have as wide of a selection, I don't think. When Siddhartha left the teacher Udaka, he met 5 other monks who were also wandering about in search of wisdom. In order to gain wisdom, it is written, we must improve our souls. We have to torture and starve our bodies. Though through great suffering of the body, that soul becomes improved. Such is the teaching of the Brahmins. Anti-human, misanthropic way of thinking, isn't that? If that is the way to gain wisdom, said Siddhartha, I shall try that way. He and the 5 monks went into a forest together, and there they remained for days. They starved themselves until their bodies became like skeletons, and their feet were too weak to carry them the shortest distance. One day Siddhartha fainted from hunger, and for a while his friends thought that he was dead, but he recovered, and as soon as he felt strong enough to speak, he said, "From now on, brethren, I am going to stop starving and torturing myself." When the other monks heard that, they said to each other, "Surely Siddhartha is giving up the good life of a truly religious man," and they left him. Siddhartha began to eat and drink, and slowly he regained his strength. The stronger he became, the clearer his thoughts became. The teachings that order men to starve themselves in order to lead the good life, and that way gain wisdom, thought Siddhartha, must be wrong, because the stronger I get, the clearer I can think about the world and about religion. But where suffering came from, and how people ought to live to lead the good life, he still did not know. Discontent is a better translation of the term. Day after day, Week after week, and month after month, he wandered in the forest and towns, living on berries and fruit he found, and rice given to him by the townspeople. Sometimes he became very tired of his way of living. He longed to see his wife and his little boy. Very often he made up his mind to give up his life as a beggar and to return to the palace. But Siddhartha knew that he would never be happy again in the palace until he had learned how other people, too, could be happy. Now, you don't have to live poverty or wealth to be able to understand and relate to people, but some people think you have to go to the extremes. And you're kept from doing God's work if you don't get the wealth, or you're not able to achieve the level of difficulty. Once he sat down under a sort of wild fig tree. Here, he said to himself, I will sit and think of all that I was taught, and of all that I have seen in my life, and of these things I shall gain wisdom. For by that time Siddhartha realized that the wisdom and truth he was seeking were not something outside of himself, not some great mystery that was hidden away somewhere at the rainbow's end. He realized that he could not get that wisdom by studying the Vedas, or by starving himself, or by sitting on nails and sharp stones, as some monks did. He now believed that the truth and wisdom a man seeks, he can find within himself. All the wisdom and knowledge a man looks for, he thought, are in his own soul, and there he ought to search for them. The book of the self is definitely a book to explore. Then he made a vow, not until I gain this wisdom will I move from under this tree. For hours and hours Siddhartha sat under the tree, thinking of all the teachings of his religion, and of all his experiences in life. Suddenly his face lit up with joy. At last, he proclaimed, I have found the key to wisdom. This is the first law of life. From good must come good, and from evil must come evil. Siddhartha wondered why he had never thought of that before, for this law of life had been known to him all his life. It was one of the important teachings of Brahmanism, through the law of the deed, but now he saw it in a new light. Now he had discovered in it the beginning of the wisdom and truth of life that he had been searching for ever since he had left home. All night long, Siddhartha sat there thinking. With the first law of life as a key to wisdom, he found he could answer all the questions that had troubled him since he became a monk. The next morning, Siddhartha realized that he was at the end of his long search for wisdom. Now he was the Buddha, which means the Enlightened One. That night, on which Prince Siddhartha Gautama of the Sakya kingdom became the Buddha, the Enlightened One, is called by his followers the Sacred Night. Sort of like Laylatul Isra. Well, that's not referring to Buddha, that's something else. Muhammad ibn Abdullah. As the tree under which he sat during that night is known as the Bo tree, the tree of wisdom. 8. The sermon at Benares. After the sacred night, the Buddha remained 7 days under the Bo tree, thinking of the first law of life and the wisdom he had gained through that. When all his ideas were so clear to him that he was ready to answer questions about them, he decided to go out and teach them to the world. First, he went to the city of Benares to find the 5 monks who had deserted him when they began to eat and drink. These monks, he thought, were seeking the truth like myself, and it is easier to teach those who want to learn than those who are not interested. When he arrived at Benares, he found 5 monks in a grove of trees outside the city, sitting close together. They saw the Buddha coming and said to each other, Here comes Siddhartha, who could not lead the life of a good monk. Let us ignore him. But when he came near, they greeted him and offered him a seat. Have you found the wisdom you were seeking? The monks asked. I have, answered the Buddha. What is the wisdom of the world? The monks asked. You all believe in karma, in the law of the deed, don't you? The Buddha asked. We do, the 5 monks answered. That is the beginning of wisdom. From good must come good, and from evil must come evil. That is the first law of life. And all things that live are ruled by that first law. But that is nothing new, the monks protested. But if that law is true, said the Buddha, then sacrifices and prayers to our many gods must be foolish. Why so? The monks asked. Because, said the Buddha, water always flows downhill. Fire is always hot. Ice is always cold. Praying to all the gods in India will not make water flow uphill, or fire cold, or ice hot. That is because there are laws in life that make these things as they are. So also that which is done cannot be undone again. Prayers and sacrifices to the gods must therefore be useless. That sounds true, said the monks. If that is true, said the Buddha, then all the idols worshipped by our people are useless. If these idols have no power to change anything in the world, they should not be prayed to and worshipped. If a man does good, the results will be good. And if he does evil, the results will be evil. And all the idols in India cannot change that. Idol worship is wrong and foolish. Now, there's merit to that point, but let's not be so materialistic in our theology. That too sounds true, said the monks. Now, if that is true, said the Buddha, then the Vedas that tell people to pray and make sacrifices and to worship idols are not holy. Holy books would not teach that which is not true and which is evil. Our priests say that the Vedas and every sacred word in them are holy, but I say the Vedas are not sacred books. The monks looked to the Buddha in great surprise. No one in India had ever dared to say that the Vedas were not holy. Well, just because people list off gods and goddesses to you doesn't mean that they have any power to do anything. Yes, the Buddha added, the Vedas teach us to believe that Brahman created people in castes, but that is not true to the first law of life. People are only divided into good people and bad people. They who are good, and they who are bad. It does not make any difference in what family they are born. Amen. Then you do not believe Brahman. Then you do not believe Brahman divided the people into castes, the monks asked in wonder. I do not. The Buddha answered, I do not believe Brahman created anything. The world was not created by Brahman. Then who created the world? The monks asked. Well, certainly not the personification of Brahman and limited ideas. I believe that the world is going to exist forever, and it will not come to an end, and anything that has no end has no beginning. The world was not created by anyone, the world always was. The monks were silent for a while, thinking of all the Buddha had said, which was so different from the teachings they had studied and believed in all their lives. And now we know that that is wrong too. We just don't believe it's wrong. We know that's wrong too. Suddenly the Buddha addressed the monks and said, there are two extremes, O monks, keep away from them. One is a life of pleasure, that is selfish and ignoble. The other is a life of self-torture, and that too is unworthy. For these two roads do not lead to the good life. Then what is the road one should follow? The monks asked. Follow the middle road. The Buddha answered, how can one find the middle path? By following the Eightfold Path. The Buddha said, and what is the Eightfold Path? The monks asked. The Eightfold Path teaches the 8 rules of life. Right belief, which is the belief that truth is the guide of man. Right resolve, to be calm all the time, and never to do harm to any living creature. Right speech, never to lie, never to slander anyone, never to use coarse or harsh language. Right behavior, never to steal, never to kill, never to do anything that one may later regret or be ashamed of. Right occupation, never to choose an occupation that is bad, like forgery, the handling of stolen goods, usury, and the like. Right effort, always to strive after that which is good, and always to keep from that which is evil. Right contemplation, always to be calm, and not allow one's thoughts to be mastered by either joy or sorrow. Right concentration is then to be found when all the other rules have been followed, and one has reached the stage of perfect peace. This, O monks, is the eightfold path. Then he carefully explained again the 8 rules of life, and ended by telling them of the 5 commands of uprightness. Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie, do not commit adultery, and do not become intoxicated at any time. When the Buddha had finished his explanations, the monks said to each other, "Surely this is wisdom. And surely Siddhartha Gautama has become the enlightened one, the Buddha, for he has set in motion the wheel of the true law of life, the law that teaches mankind that the world is ruled by justice." Then they bowed to the Buddha and told him that they wished to become his followers. The first sermon that the Buddha preached to the 5 monks is now famous among his followers as the Sermon at Benares.